Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the Lin Family Murders? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. In 2009, the Lin family lived in North Epping, New South Wales, Australia. The family had 6 members living in one house: 45-year-old Min, his 43-year-old wife Lily, their 3 children, 15-year-old Brenda, 12-year-old Henry, and 9-year-old Terry, as well as Lily's 39-year-old sister Irene. Min's sister Kathy Lin and her husband Robert Z lived in another house about 600 feet from the Lin family home. Min ran a newsstand, which is referred to as a news agency in Australia, as well as in the UK and Ireland. Apparently, Min was moderately financially successful, although he worked long hours to achieve this goal. In July of 2009, Brenda went on a school trip to New Caledonia. This takes us to the evening of July 17 and the early morning hours of July 18, 2009. 5 members of the Lin family were in their home, with only Brenda missing, as she was on that school trip. At some point between 10:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., an assailant turned off the electricity to the house using an outside power box. The prosecution's theory is that there was just one assailant. There may have been multiple assailants. It's not known. The perpetrator then entered the house, perhaps using a key, and systematically attacked the family using a hammer-like object. First, the attacker bludgeoned Min and Lily, then attacked Lily's sister, Irene. After this, they attacked Henry, then Terry. Both fought back as they were struck several times with this hammer-like object. All of the victims died as a result of the attack. 4 of them died from asphyxia. The perpetrator did not enter Brenda's room, as if they knew that she was not there. During this crime, the assailant left behind 24 bloody shoe prints, which appear to be between size 8.5 and 10.5. The prints were later matched to the sneaker brand Asics. Later that morning, just before 10 a.m., Kathy Lin and Robert Z went to the Lin family house after someone called them and informed them that the news agency did not open. Upon discovering the bodies, Kathy called the authorities and said that her brother's family had been murdered. The police arrived to find the 5 members of the family dead in 3 separate bedrooms. The victims were so badly beaten that it was difficult to identify them. There was blood spatter all over the house. No property was missing from the house. Because Brenda was only 15 years old, she could not live at that house alone. She moved in with Kathy and Robert. They would become her legal guardians. They also took over the news agency. During the police investigation, it became apparent that Robert may have been involved. He cleaned his garage the morning of the murders. A blood stain was found on the floor of the garage, which contained DNA from 4 of the 5 victims. A secret camera installed by the police recorded Robert cutting up a shoebox for sneakers and flushing it down the toilet. The box was for a pair of Asics sneakers, size 9.5. He was also seen wearing sneakers matching that description on prior occasions. Robert had a key to the Lin family home. He was familiar with the layout of the house. For example, he knew where the power box was. He was aware that Brenda was on a school trip, and he allegedly perpetrated abuse of a sexual nature against Brenda both before and after the murders. Robert was arrested on May 5, 2011, and charged with murder. While in jail, he allegedly told another inmate that he sedated his wife in order to sneak out of the house on the morning of the murders. He also screamed at an elderly inmate who was using a walker in the exercise yard. Apparently, everybody in the exercise yard was mortified and stopped what they were doing, like all the inmates were shocked. I guess they just couldn't believe that anyone would scream in jail. That would be as unlikely as finding a guilty person in jail. It just doesn't happen. The first trial was discontinued after it came to light that Robert may have harmed Brenda. The prosecution wanted to rethink their theory of the motive. Robert was tried for a second time in August of 2014, but the judge had health issues, so the trial was discontinued. He was tried a third time in February of 2015. The jury was not able to reach a verdict. Robert was tried for a fourth time in June of 2016. The jury would not be able to reach a unanimous verdict, but the judge said she would accept 11-1. In January of 2017, Robert was convicted of 5 counts of murder, and the next month he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. Was Robert Z. actually guilty? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. Robert allegedly started abusing Brenda prior to the murders and allegedly continued after the murders. He knew that she was away on a school trip, and he knew that if her parents were killed, she may live with him. Robert was familiar with the Lin family home and had a key. Nothing was missing from the home. What was the motive? It must have been something personal in nature. Robert allegedly admitted sedating his wife on the morning of the murders to a jailhouse informant. Robert cleaned his garage on the morning of the murders. A bloodstain on the garage floor contained DNA of his victims. He appeared to have the same type of sneakers the attacker wore. He may have been resentful of the success of Min and Lily. Robert had opened a restaurant in Melbourne, Australia, but it failed. He and his wife moved to Sydney, but were unable to find work. By killing the Lin family, Robert found himself a job. Now moving to the exculpatory evidence. There were no witnesses or video of the attack. One attacker would have difficulty controlling 5 victims, suggesting there were multiple assailants. Robert's wife, Kathy, said that she was asleep with him at the time of the murders, although it's not clear how she can be sure, considering she was asleep herself. The autopsy reports indicate that the murders occurred between 10:30 p.m., July 17, and 2 a.m. on July 18. Computer records verify that Robert was active on his computer until 2 a.m. The prosecution did not dispute this. He was definitely in his house until 2 a.m. The bloodstain on the garage floor has another explanation other than Robert being guilty. Both Robert and Kathy went into the Lin family residence and discovered the bodies. It is reasonable to believe that one of them stepped in blood and then transferred it to the garage floor later. Another problem is, when was the blood deposited? It did not come with a timestamp. It could have been there for quite some time. The DNA testing did not seem very reliable. The sample was very small. It isn't even clear if the material was actually blood. The DNA analysis was technically the most complicated in the history of prosecutions in Australia. Interestingly, neither prosecution nor defense experts could exclude Brenda's DNA from the sample. If her DNA was in the bloodstain, then the bloodstain is not connected to the murders. Robert's defense claimed that Robert only destroyed the shoebox because he was afraid the police would falsely accuse him of the murders. Interestingly, the police had video and audio recording devices installed all over the place. In Robert's house, in his vehicle. They collected numerous recordings, but the shoebox incident was the only inculpatory item they ever discovered. Robert's alleged admission in jail about sedating his wife was to a jailhouse informant, the most unreliable source of information in the galaxy. Robert was never convicted for harming Brenda. He was never even charged. Even if he did mistreat her, that doesn't mean he had a motive to kill the entire family. Investigators believe that the condition of the crime scene supports the idea that the assailant wanted to kill Min and Lily and only attacked Irene and the 2 boys because they woke up. If Robert really wanted to have more access to Brenda, why would his initial intent have been to leave Irene alive? If she survived, she would have raised Brenda. The defense disputed the idea that Robert was resentful of Min and Lily. Robert's wife Kathy believes he is innocent. For a long time, Brenda did as well. When considering all of the evidence, do I believe that Robert Z. was guilty? I think in reality, he probably was, but as far as reasonable doubt, there is no way he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Multiple juries struggle with this case for a reason. The case against Robert is shockingly weak. The police went for a long time without finding any evidence against anybody, and then magically they built this case against Robert. This was a horrible crime, and the Crown wanted someone to pay for it. The Crown drew conclusions which were not even supported by the little evidence they had. The accusation of harming Brenda gave the Crown a better motive, But again, that allegation was never proven. I think Robert probably had a temper, may have struck people the wrong way, and was maybe a bit rude and controlling. The Crown was able to seize on those negative characteristics and paint him as a killer. Moving to my final thoughts, what happened to the Lin family was horrible. It causes a strong emotional reaction of anger in people who hear about it. The second part of the story is the mistreatment of Grande, which only makes people angrier. Because Robert was the target of that accusation, people just assume he must have committed the homicides. So all this anger is focused on him, someone who just happened to have an opportunity to commit the crime. The lack of evidence could not shield him from the intense rage. This type of anger burns through logic and reason and cries out for any type of justice. It doesn't matter if the person actually did it or not. People want someone to be held accountable. Robert may be guilty, and he may be getting what he deserves, but the guilty verdict was achieved through emotionality, not rationality. Those are my thoughts on the Lin family murders. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.